Hi everybody, what we're going to talk about today is Europe encountering America. So the main idea of today's lecture is to take a look at Christopher Columbus, a European, as he seeks to find a sea route to Asia. Instead, he lands in what we now know as North America and South America. But before even this happens, there are groups of Europeans that come to the North American continent, and those people are the Vikings. So evidence shows that the first Europeans to arrive in the Americas were the Norse, or the Vikings, a people who came from Scandinavia. In AD 1001, Leif Erikson and 35 other Vikings explored the coast of Labrador and stayed in the winter in Newfoundland. Viking attempts to settle permanently in the Americas failed, mainly because Native Americans opposed them. Unlike later European colonists, the Vikings did not have better weapons than those of the Native Americans who outnumbered them. Erikson was believed to be the first European to arrive in North America. It's speculated that Norsemen may have come as far as present-day Minnesota. And what you see here on this picture on the left is a statue of Leif Erikson near the Minnesota state capitol. So with the Renaissance came a renewed interest in the world's geography. That, along with European states being eager to find a sea route to Asia. In the AD 200s, the Greek-educated Egyptian geographer and astronomer Claudius Ptolemy drew maps of a round world, complete with 360 lines of longitude, 1 degree apart, projected onto a flat surface. In 1406, Ptolemy's geography was rediscovered, and it was printed in 1475. It became very influential, and its basic system of lines of latitude and longitude is still used today. Ptolemy's geography made the Earth seem much smaller than it actually was. As a result, Christopher Columbus miscalculated the distance from Spain to India. Columbus tried but failed to get financial backing from the rulers of England and France for an expedition. In 1492, Spain's King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella finally agreed to finance Columbus's expedition. In the mid-1400s, Christopher Columbus, an Italian navigator, became interested in sailing across the Atlantic. Columbus and his 3 ships left Spain in August 1492. After a long, frightening trip across the Atlantic, they landed in the Bahamas, probably on what is today known as Watling Island. He called the Taino people. He met Indians because he thought he had reached the Indies. Columbus also found the islands of Cuba and Hispaniola. In April 1493, he returned to Spain with gold, parrots, spices, and Native Americans. Columbus impressed Ferdinand and Isabella and convinced them to finance another trip by promising them as much gold as they wanted. Columbus soon left for his second voyage with 17 ships and 1,200 colonists. In November 1493, he landed in Hispaniola. Many of the colonists felt that Columbus had misled them with promises of gold, so they returned to Spain. Columbus stayed and explored Hispaniola, where he found some gold. In 1496, he went back to Spain. His brother Bartholomew stayed and founded Santo Domingo in Hispaniola. This was the first capital of Spain's American Empire. Columbus made 2 more voyages to America. He studied the Orinoco River in South America and mapped the American coastline from Guatemala to Panama. By the early 1500s, the Spanish had explored the major Caribbean islands and established colonies on Hispaniola, Cuba, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico. They had begun to explore the American mainland. Settlers flocked to the Caribbean, hoping to become wealthy through the conquest and trade. Before colonization could begin, Ferdinand and Isabella had to establish their claim to the new lands. Portugal had claimed the right to control the Atlantic route to Asia. To prevent a war between the two nations in 1493, the Catholic Church's Pope Alexander VI established a line of demarcation. This imaginary north to south line running down the middle of the Atlantic granted Spain control of everything west of the line and Portugal control of everything east of the line. In 1494, Spain and Portugal signed the Treaty of Tordesillas. This gave Portugal the right to control the route around Africa to India, and Spain claimed the new lands of the Americas except for now what is Brazil. The Americas were named after Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian who repeated Columbus's voyage, sailing for the Spanish in 1499 and for the Portuguese in 1501. He sailed far south along the coast of South America and eventually discovered that this large land mass could not be a part of Asia. His descriptions of the New World were widely read in Europe. In 1507, a German scholar published a study in which he proposed that the new continent be named America for Amerigo the Discoverer. Juan Ponce de Leon, the Spanish governor of Puerto Rico, discovered Florida in 1513. Also in 1513, Vasco da Balboa became the first European to reach the Pacific coast of America. He crossed the Isthmus of Panama. An isthmus, if you don't know, is a narrow strip of land that connects a larger mass of land. And this was the first from the New World to reach or see the Pacific Ocean. In 1520, Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese mariner working for Spain, discovered the strait at the southernmost tip of South America. Magellan thought that the Spice Islands, or Indonesia, were just a few days away. He grossly underestimated the size of the Pacific Ocean. Magellan died in the Philippines, and Elcano continued the mission, being the first known people to circumnavigate or sail around the globe. The Columbian Exchange was a series of interchanges that permanently changed the world's ecosystems and changed nearly every culture around the world. Native Americans taught the Europeans local farming methods and introduced them to new crops and foods such as corn, tobacco, and the potato. Europeans also adapted many devices invented by the Indians, such as the canoe. The Europeans introduced the Native Americans to many crops such as wheat, oats, and barley, and to some domestic livestock. The Europeans introduced the Native Americans to technologies such as metalworking. Europeans also brought diseases that killed millions of Native Americans because they lacked immunity to the diseases. What kinds of diseases? Measles, mumps, chickenpox, and typhus. The consequences were devastating to Native Americans. Some Native American groups suffered a 90% population loss in the first century after European contact. This catastrophe reduced the labor supply available to Europeans, who then turned to enslaving Africans. Slavery in the Western Hemisphere is traceable to the Columbian Exchange. This concludes the first part of our lecture.